dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga pulisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga pulisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan diin ang kahalagahan ng pulisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan!
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socio-economic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga polisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga polisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan din ng kahalagahan ng polisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan.
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socioeconomic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month or DPRM held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Welcome to the PIDS webinar series. Before we start our virtual event, we have some reminders. For attendees, your microphone is automatically muted upon entry. If you wish to join the discussion, click the Q&A icon, type your question, and click send. For Facebook viewers, you may send your question using the comment section. Remember to keep your questions concise and direct to the point. We will screen all questions to ensure that they are relevant to the webinar topic and the presentation. The moderator will read the questions during the open forum and cover as many as possible depending on the available time. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on the PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. The recording will also be made publicly available on the PIDS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your active participation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our seminar. I am Sheila Siar, your host and moderator. We are featuring today an internationally renowned economist who will enlighten us on the concept of shared prosperity. Shared prosperity is a common phrase in current development policy discourse. In fact, you'll find more than 2 million results if you search it on the internet. Our speaker this afternoon will walk us through the concept and the meaning of shared prosperity and how it can be operationalized and measured through 4 development goals. So to formally open our conversation this afternoon, let us listen to the opening message of Dr. Aniceto Orbeta Jr., the president of PIDS.
Thank you, Sheila. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our hybrid seminar today titled Creating Shared Prosperity, Operationalizing and Inclusive Growth Goals with Real-World Data. First, allow me to greet the following officials: Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department Executive Director Nobel Bangsal, Senate Economic Planning Office Executive Director Merwin Salazar, League of Municipalities of the Philippines Executive Director Mayor Attorney Cynthia Pacotelo Fortes, Miriam College President Laura del Rosario, Zwilig Family Foundation President Oster Panadero. I also would like to greet our guests here at PIDS, those participating via Zoom and those watching the live stream in our PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Nanak Kakwani, an esteemed economist and poverty and development research expert. He has published over 100 papers in leading international journals, including 9 papers in Econometrica. He has also authored 6 books published in well-known publishers such as the Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, Palgrave Macmillan, and Edward Edgar. Dr. Kakwani is a distinguished fellow of the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation in India. He is also former chief economist and director of the UNDP International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth in Brazil, and more importantly, a longtime friend of PIDS. Today, he will share the study defining and measuring 4 recently evolved development concepts: proper growth, proper development, inclusive growth, and inclusive development, which he co-wrote with Dr. Zakaria Sediki. The progress of a country is measured by, among others, how far it has reduced poverty. In the Philippines, our target is to slash poverty incidence from 18% in 2021 to between 8 and 9% by 2028, as stated in the Philippine Development Plan. However, we know that poverty is multidimensional, and measuring it undoubtedly is a challenge, as pointed out in a 2018 PIDS study by Senior Research Fellow Jose Ramon Albert and Supervising Research Specialist Jana Prismanos. PIDS also contributed to studies investigating whether the poor benefit from economic growth. This includes eradicating poverty in the Philippines by 2030, an elusive goal by our beloved former Vice President, Celia Reyes, who is with us today. Thank you, ma'am, for coming. And does economic growth benefit the poor? Evidence from the 2015-2018 growth episode, also by Dr. Reyes, Arkin Arbuida, Rina Asis, and Rita Vargas. Today, Dr. Kakwani will share a new model, an integrated approach that allows the simultaneous evaluation of growth and distribution. By connecting the two, Dr. Kakwani and Dr. Siddiqui established and defined 4 developmental goals, namely proper growth, inclusive growth, proper development, and inclusive development. To illustrate its application, they examined the growth and development in India by analyzing the state-level data over 2 decades. It would also be interesting to see how the Philippines would fare if we apply the author's proposed model here in the country. Dr. Kakwani, thank you for joining us here in the PIDS to share your paper. We are honored to have you with us. I encourage everyone to join our open forum after the presentation. Your active participation is encouraged to make our discussion richer and livelier. Again, good afternoon, and we look forward to your active participation. Sheila?
Thank you very much, Dr. Orbeta. I'd like to give everyone an idea of the size of our audience today. So we have nearly 100 attendees on Zoom and less than 10 live stream viewers on Facebook and about 30 on-site participants who are here at PIDS. So we expect more participants as during the course of our discussion. Okay, and we welcome questions from participants on all 3 platforms. So for those who are joining us on Zoom, just type your question on using the Q&A facility on Zoom. And for those who are watching us on Facebook, just use the comment section. And for our on-site participants, you may ask your questions live during the open forum. Okay, and we will accommodate as many questions as possible that are relevant to the discussion during the open forum. Before I introduce our speaker, let us have a poll to break the ice. Everyone is welcome to participate. You can see the poll now on the screen. And the question is, do you think pro-poor development and inclusive development are the same? Do you think pro-poor development and inclusive development are the same? Use your, just scan the QR code or click the Mentimeter link, which is on the comment section of Zoom and Facebook. Okay. Do you think pro-poor development and inclusive development are the same? Okay. Can we now see the results? Okay. Majority answered no. So if you want to know if your answer is correct, you should listen intently to the presentation. And so we now close the poll. And at this point, I invite all of you to our featured presentation this afternoon, titled Defining and Measuring 4 Development Concepts, Pro-Poor Growth, Pro-Poor Development, Inclusive Growth, and Inclusive Development, which is from a paper by Dr. Nanak Kakwani and Dr. Zakaria Siddiqui. The presentation will be delivered by our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Nanak Kakwani, the Distinguished Fellow of the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation in India. In addition to this, he has been a visiting professor of economics at the China Institute for Income Distribution at Beijing Normal University since 2017. He was a professor of economics and head of the Department of Econometrics for 30 years at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. He was chief economist and director of the UNDP International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth in Brazil from 2004 to 2006. Dr. Kakwani's research areas include poverty, inequality, pro-poor growth, taxation, public policies, human development, and social welfare. He has published more than 100 papers in leading international journals, including 9 papers in Econometrica and 6 books published by reputed publishers like Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, Palgrave Macmillan, and Edward Elgar. And I think he has a new book to show us later. Okay. He was elected as a fellow of the Australian Research Committee of Social Science and awarded the Mahalanobis Gold Medal for his outstanding contributions to quantitative economics. His well-known Kakwani Index has been a standard measure for progressivity in taxation and is used by social scientists, statisticians, and economists. He was the first to define and measure pro-poor growth for the Asian Development Bank in 2000. The Journal of Income Distribution brought out a special issue of the journal in honor of Dr. Kakwani in 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Dr. Nanak Kakwani.
Mr. President of PIDS, you have correctly pointed out that I have been old friend of PIDS. And that's very correct. And I have given presentations here before. So I'm always very delighted to come here, meet researchers here, and make presentation. So I'm greatly delighted to come here. Now, this idea of this paper, that there's an institute in India called the Center for Economic and Social Research in Hyderabad. It's a well-known institute. So about 6 months ago, they asked me to contribute a paper on development, on inclusive development. They want to, institute some research in that area. So I was very delighted that I thought, that it's a good time to write a paper on inclusive development. So I wrote this paper, submitted to them, and I made presentation to them, and very well-known professors in India, they gave me some very useful comments, and I have revised this paper. So this is a, very, on these topics, there's a lot of vagueness in these concepts. So I have tried to clarify all those concepts and how to operationalize it using the real data. So let me start with a PowerPoint. Share, right? And then this one? Yeah, a PowerPoint. Huh? Yeah, okay. Okay, so it's not moving. So can I do it with here? How do I do it?
This one. You use control it here.
Okay. Okay, so let me start. Economic growth, everybody talks about it. That when, nowadays, the Philippines is growing very well, almost 6%, one of the fastest growing economy the Philippines is at the moment. Economists tend to talk about, the growth as a development. They think that if any country has achieved high economic growth, it is developing very well. But my view is quite opposite of that. That what I will be talking about is that growth is necessary, but it's not sufficient to make the people better off. Now, it's true that economic growth generates goods and services in the economy. It generates goods and services in the economy, which I call it as an economic pie, okay, which needs to be enlarged to achieve a prosperity, because their goods and services have to be produced. So the prosperity comes from these goods and services which people have available to them. Now, but these I view that growth generates goods and services which which are just the means, that people have means to better their life, to enhance their life. But everybody does not share the prosperity or pie, which is generated by economic growth. Recently, I came across a write-up from Nobel laureate Angus Deaton. You must have heard of his name. And he's saying that growth is necessary, but many people don't get the benefits of growth. If they get the benefits of the growth benefits are very meager for many people. So the growth is measured in terms of GDP, growth rate in GDP per capita, total GDP, but it does not give all people don't share the same amount of affluence or means the growth is generating. So what I say, the pie distribution, the economic pie, which is the total output which is generated in the economy, pie distribution determines how population shares the pie. If the pie share is equitable, we may call it shared prosperity. And our ultimate social objective is to achieve shared prosperity. And that is my view, that growth is not sufficient to have a shared prosperity. We can have a prosperity, but not shared prosperity. Now, economists are deeply divided about how we achieve shared prosperity. Some believe that society must focus on policies to enlarge the pie first, and then we should have policies to divide the pie equitably. That's one view of the economist. The belief is that expanding pie size and dividing the pie are mutually exclusive. That if they are two different things, they are mutually exclusive. But we don't share with this view. We think that both distribution and pie distribution and total prosperity, they are the same phenomenon, part of the two phenomena, and growth and distribution are interrelated. They have to be simultaneously addressed. We cannot just say, okay, we have a growth first, and then we distribute the output which is generated in the economy, our economic pie, and distribute to the people. No. Both are interrelated and they have to be determined simultaneously. So what is done in the paper? My focus is on both enlarging the pie and also how pie is distributed or how pie is shared. So this paper talks how to integrate the two, that growth as well as the distribution of the pie. So this gives rise to linking the two phenomena, gives rise to recently evolved 4 development goals. I have 4 development goals: pro-poor growth, inclusive growth, pro-poor development, and inclusive development. Now, unfortunately, literature does not make the distinction between that. They think they are the same thing. But here I will inform you that they are not the same thing. These 4 goals, in my view, they are the alternative characterization of shared prosperity. They are that how prosperity is shared. So these different goals, there are 4 goals to know how prosperity is shared. So this paper defined these 4 goals and providing a methodology to operationalize them using the real world data. And I must also tell you that the Philippines, I have got a lot of experience with the Philippines data I used to work before. And I think that a lot of data are available in Philippines. They have done very good surveys, in Philippines. So the information is available, data are available. So all the, these methodology which I'm going to talk about can be easily applied to Philippines. And I hope that PIDS will take up that, research and apply this methodology to the Philippines. So in this paper, because it was, I was invited to write paper from India. So I have given the illustration from India using Indian data. Although a lot of, interesting data which I required was not available, but whatever was available, I presented in this paper. So it's not the perfect illustration, but just to illustrate the methodology. But I think the Philippines may have more richer data, so we can apply this techniques, methodology more fully. Now, the distribution of pie is fundamental. Actually, in 50s and 60s, trickle down was the dominant development strategy. I mean, you must have known, the 50s and 60s. And it implied that economic growth was a dominant factor that would automatically enhance people's standard of living. It will automatically reduce poverty. So idea was that we should focus on economic growth. And when, growth means that, when you focus on the growth means that the people, the entrepreneurs and all that, when they invest in the country, then output is generated out of that in those investments. So then they say that trickle down was that when first trickle down means that first benefits of the growth goes to the people who are investing and rich, and then when they start spending the money, then it trickles down to the poor and poverty is reduced. So idea of trickle down was that you don't have to do anything, just promote growth and you will, achieve poverty reduction. But this trickle down continued. But in 1970s, there was a book, very, very prominent book, very famous book called Redistribution with Growth. It was written by World Bank economists, Aluvaria, Chenry, and others, Carter and Chenry. They said that, that trickle down was not sufficient, that poverty reduction will be very slow. There has been a lot of growth in the developing countries, but poverty continued to be higher. So, but interestingly, despite of these concerns in the 70s, there were two World Bank economists, Dollar and Cray. Actually, at that time, I was at the Asian Development Bank in 2000. I joined Asian ADB in 1999. I was a staff consultant for more than a year. Then this working paper of this paper came out at that time when I was at the ADB. So despite of these concerns, this paper, Dollar and Clay, published, became a highly influential paper. It's called Growth is Good for the Poor. That concluded that growth generally does benefit the poor, and that anyone who cares about the poor should favor growth-enhancing policy of the good rule of law, fiscal discipline, openness to international trade, and so on. So that was the, that is similar to the trickle down, that World Bank, although trickle down was lost its shine in the 70s, people started criticizing. But even the new millennium, the World Bank economists, they published that paper that growth is good for the poor. Is it? And that's what I will be questioning that. But then there's the issue that is distribution important, So there's a book called Martin Bronfenor. He published a seminal book in 1971 entitled Income Distribution Theory. So he raised an important question. Is distribution a sufficiently important problem for serious study? I mean, interesting that many economists didn't think that distribution was was fundamental. They thought growth was more fundamental. But this Martin Bronfenor, he brought out in his chapter 1, he presents a sample of diverse views from many economists, very well-known economists. Some economists viewed distribution as fundamental, while others thought that distribution was unimportant. So there was no clear consensus on this issue. So if you want to, but my view now here is that if we want to achieve shared prosperity, then we consider distribution alone. We consider distribution alone with economic growth to be fundamental. So let me draw your attention to a number of the quotations. There was Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, India's Prime Minister, in as early as 1939. He wrote in his book, this Discovery of India, he wrote that thick book from prison, where he talked about this what is that quotation? How to get rid of this? Okay. Anyway, his quotation was that in 1939, it's okay, don't worry about it. His view was that in democracy, we give equal vote to everybody. Yeah, but to achieve economic and social equity, we cannot, we have to have equality there too. I mean, equity in votes is not enough. We have to have equity in both social and economic aspects of life. So that was, his view was in as early as 1939. You can imagine, So then in 1950, Ambedkar, he was an architect of Indian Constitution. He echoed the Nehru's perception of, democracy. And he said, we are going to enter into a life of contradiction in politics. We have equity of one man and one vote, but still we shall continue denying people equality in social and economic life because of our social and economic structure. Our social and economic structure is such that we don't achieve equity. We can achieve equal votes for everyone, in election and all that, but we may not achieve. So there's a contradiction. So main message of this paper is that economic growth provides means, but distribution is fundamental to achieve Nehru and Ambedkar's economic and social equality. In this context, the Sen, your Amartya Sen, he was my teacher. He got a Nobel Prize in 1998, Amartya Sen. So Sen and Drees point out that economic growth is very important as a means of bettering people's life, but to go much faster, it has to be combined with devoting resources to remove illiteracy, ill health, undernutrition, and other deprivations. Okay, so that was, Sen and Drees. Actually, there's a huge debate in India took place between Sen and Bhagwati, that Bhagwati was accusing Sen that he does not pay attention to growth, enough attention. But he's saying that growth is important, but you have to go faster than that. You have to do something more than that, just not achieve growth. So there's a big controversy in India about it. And Bhagwati and Sen. But I think the main focus of the paper is on both growth and distribution. We have a simultaneous, these are simultaneous processes, and we should pay attention to both simultaneously. They are not mutually exclusive. And then significant shift towards distribution happened in 1990s and in the new millennium. The consensus among developing economists was that we must have a mixture of growth enhancing and distribution policies to achieve central development goals. Okay. So that gave rise to, people started talking about pro-poor growth. And fortunately, I was appointed at the ADB as a consultant, and they were talking, everybody was talking at ADB on pro-poor growth. When I joined it, actually in Hawaii, they had a conference in Hawaii. They had a session on pro-poor growth. And then they invited me to present my views about pro-poor growth. And the thing is that development agencies were talking, United Nations, OECD, define pro-poor growth as benefiting the poor and providing opportunities to improve their economic situation. Okay. And ADB also had a poverty reduction strategy at that time. It said that poverty reduction strategy of ADB described pro-poor growth as labor-absorbing growth, accompanied by policies and programs to mitigate inequalities and facilitate income and employment generation for the poor, particularly for women and other traditionally excluded groups. That was the ADB's strategy of pro-poor growth. But I found, I was very confused with these, when I looked at that these definitions are very broad. They focus on policies to achieve pro-poor growth. Maybe they achieve pro-poor growth, but broad policy do not help measure pro-poor growth. What is pro-poor growth? How to measure that, and how these different policies which ADB was talking about, UN and OECD, how to achieve that. But if you don't know what inclusive pro-poor growth is, how can you achieve, through the policies? You have to, if you have a policy, you have to evaluate them in view of some goal. So we worked on that, and actually I wrote a very widely quoted paper, which is published in the ADB's Journal of Asian Economic Review. Parnia and Kakwani, you know Parnia. He was my supervisor at ADB, so we wrote that paper, and that paper became a very famous paper defining what pro-poor growth is. So here I just give you the definition of pro-poor growth. Quickly I will go through, without being technical. that there are two concepts. The one relative definition is that if the growth rate is positive, the growth process, if it benefits the poor proportionally more than non-poor, then we call it pro-poor. From economic growth, people draw benefits, they get benefits. But if poor gets proportionally more benefits than the non-poor, then we call it pro-poor. Otherwise, we call it anti-poor. Similarly, if the growth rate, total growth rate is negative, and if poor suffer less than the non-poor in reduction of their income, then we also call it pro-poor. But if they suffer more, then it's non-poor. So this is a relative definition of pro-poor when you say proportionally, But then in 2008, I wrote paper with he and Son, where we talked about absolute pro-poor growth. There's a distinction between relative and absolute. The absolute is that actual, that the growth in terms of the amounts of money, Relative is proportional to something, the proportional to the mean. So the absolute is that if growth rate is positive, growth process is pro-poor, if the poor enjoy greater absolute benefits from the growth. When I say absolute benefit means the actual income, in terms of, Philippine peso or dollars and so on. So this is a definition, this is a stronger definition than the previous one, relative pro-poor growth. And then Ravalian, Martin Ravalian, he's a very famous World Bank economist. He has now passed away, as you might be knowing. He says that growth is pro-poor if it reduces poverty. We don't agree with that definition. I can explain that, but let me skip that. And then, so we wrote a paper called Poverty Equivalent Growth Rate in 2008. Now, link between growth and poverty is very complex, determined by inequality change. So the interrelation between the three factors, poverty, inequality, and growth, is known in the literature as PIG, P-I-G, poverty, inequality, and growth. So this was the idea given by, PIG idea is given in Sumner, 2003. So anyway, poverty equivalent growth rate combines the economic growth as well as the distribution and comes out with a composite index of growth and distribution. So you can say that, if you want to reduce the poverty, and then you should focus not on the growth alone, but poverty equivalent growth rate. That's the, policy prescription. So, but this, bit complex, because we have to calculate the growth elasticity of poverty. So in this paper, we simplify that and we use the social welfare system, functions to define pro-poor growth. Okay, so in this context, I define a poverty social welfare function. Poverty social welfare function. What is poverty social welfare function? When, the social welfare function means that how much weight you give to the incomes of different people, in this, here we have, everybody has a different incomes. So how much we give weight to different incomes of the different people, then we can define a social welfare function. So idea of social welfare function is that how much importance you give to different people with different incomes. So that is the idea of social welfare function. It's a weighted average of incomes. Now, so the poverty social welfare function gives all the weights to the poor. Okay. And zero weight to the non-poor, which means that society only cares about the poor. That's why we are talking about pro-poor, and whatever happens to the non-poor, we don't care about it. Society doesn't care. So we define social welfare function, which focuses only on the poor, because all the weight is given to the poor. So from this, we derive a social welfare function. This doesn't work. Okay, social welfare function X0 ZX ZK, because Z is the poverty line. So we have to first identify who are the poor, right? If any household has income less than the poverty line, household is poor, and all the members belonging to that household is also poor, So this is a social welfare function, which gives all the weight to the poor and zero weight to the non-poor. And from there, we define, so this is the weighting scheme. This is not working, huh? Just a cursor, no cursor. Okay. Oh, okay, no. So here you can see that there are three kinds of social welfare functions we have used here: V0, V1, and V2. Now V0, that poor, that all the poor get exactly the same weight. That this horizontal line, I don't know how to point out. So anyway, this is the weighting scheme where we give all the weights to the poor. Now, so from here, we define a pro-poor index, which is the growth rate of the social welfare function divided by the growth rate of the mean income. So, it's working, huh? Okay, here, this is the social welfare when, the general welfare function. So V0, where all the poor gets the same weight, this one, and non-poor gets zero weight. And this is V1 and V2, So the K in this is interpreted as a inequality aversion parameter. The larger the K, then you are giving greater importance to the very poor. Okay. Anyway, so this is the pro-poor index, which we can exclude that. But if this is the pro-poor index, if it is greater than 1, then we can say that growth is pro-poor. If it is less than 1, growth is anti-poor. So the pattern of relative growth is determined by this. So this tells you that if there's a gain in the growth rate, then it is pro-poor. If there's a loss of growth rate, then it is non-poor. It's anti-poor. So this is a very, that intuitively we are explaining. Intuitively, the explanation is that gain means pro-poor and loss means anti-poor. So which is easy to explain to the policymakers that, okay, that when there's a gain in the growth rate, we call it pro-poor. If there's a loss in growth rate, we call it anti-poor. So similarly, we can have a absolute pro-poor growth and relative pro-poor growth. Let's not worry about it. So this is the idea of pro-poor growth, where poor get proportionally more benefits than the non-poor. Absolute means that when poor gets absolute amount of output, then it is absolute pro-poor. Okay, so that's the idea of absolute. But now I want to move to development. What is development? Now, our view of development, that, the poverty or pro-poor growth, they are measured in income space. That income, we talk about the income. Income is the means. The growth generates the means. So people have access to the income. So they can better their life. They can enhance their life. So if a country achieves growth, it is applauded. That is it's a developing. Country is developing, but growth is measuring in income space, which provides people with the means to lead the better life. Means are necessary, but insufficient to give people quality of life they must have. Okay, so according to Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, the economic development has to be, we are talking about pro-poor growth, now we are talking about pro-poor development. Okay, so according to him, economic development has to be concerned with the kind of life people can lead, what they can or cannot do. For example, whether they are well nourished, whether they get appropriate education, or ability to escape avoidable mobility, or even the deaths, avoidable deaths. So the development is measured in well-being space, in a different space than the poverty or than the pro-poor growth. So his idea of development relates to enhancing people's well-being and standard of living. Standard of living is not the same thing as having income. Okay, he developed the most comprehensive framework of well-being through functioning and capabilities. While functioning is people's achievement, capability is their ability to achieve. So functionings are directly related to what life people lead, where the capabilities are the freedom people have to choose what life they want to. So choice is also part of the capabilities. So this is the idea of Sen's idea of well-being, of Sen's idea of development. Okay, so in this paper, we make distinction. The development is different from pro-poor growth or poverty or inequality, The development is quite a different concept. I'm making the distinction between the two, that growth can provide you means, right? And means are useful to achieve better life, but there's no one-to-one relationship between them. The means are not sufficient. People have a lot of means, but still they may not have good life. So there's a distinction between the two, right? There's no one-to-one relationship between them. Let me give you an example. That supposing you enhance, supposing you increase the longevity of the people, supposing you increase the life expectancy of the people, right? So people are living longer, right? But if income is not increasing, so the people are living longer, which means that per capita income is declining. So which means that can lead to poverty, but still you can have, a better, longer longevity, longer life, So the relationship between, is not very, one-to-one. I mean, you can have a very rich people, but still suffering from obesity, suffering from many diseases, rich people can suffer. So they don't have a good life. So the development is about what life people can lead, where the means are growth provides only the means to achieve better life. But you may not achieve better life always, Okay. So that's the distinction between development and pro-poor growth. The pro-poor development. Okay. So the pro-poor development, what's happening? Gone. Okay. Again, we have gone back.
We need to go back.
No, yeah, go back. Lot of. Okay. So what we have to do that okay, so if we want to pro-poor development is about the functioning and the capabilities in terms of the Amartya sense, that what kind of life people are leading, So we have to, idea in this paper is to generalize the social welfare function, because social welfare function is an income space, in terms of income, right? So what we do is we generalize to, we must generalize the poverty social welfare function to the poverty social well-being function. Okay. So this is what I have done in the paper, that we are interested in development. So we are talking about generalizing this. So this is a general sort of supposing WX, omega X is the well-being indicator of a person with income X. Okay. From this, it gives you the general well-being function. And from there, we derive pro-poor development index. So relative pro-poor development is, the growth rate in well-being function divided by the growth rate of the average well-being. So from there, we immediately shows that relative pro-poor development leads to gain in relative well-being growth rate, and loss gives you it's not pro-poor development, but anti-poor development. Okay. Oh, again. Again, it's going back. Okay. Okay. So pro-poor development is defined that way. So we have a relative pro-poor development, also absolute pro-poor development. So let's not worry about both distinction between the two. Now I want to make a distinction between pro-poor growth and inclusive growth. What's the distinction between the two? Now, pro-poor growth is deliberately biased in favor of the poor, because as social welfare function, we gave all the weight to the poor. But inclusive development is about the whole population, okay? So in this case, we develop a framework for pro-poor growth, employing poverty social welfare function, assigning weight to the poor only, but non-poor receive zero weight. But in contrast, inclusive growth is broad-based. It covers the whole population, so benefiting everyone, not just the poor. Okay, so if growth results in high inequality, some people receive excessive benefits, others receive meager benefits. So we don't call that as an inclusive growth. Okay, so I mean, for instance, recently there has been a debate in USA, which focuses on 1% against 99%. You must have heard about that debate, where the top 1% gets the lion's share of the income, where the bottom 90% get very smaller benefits. That has happened last 30, 40 years. That's what Angus Deaton was pointing out, that that the top 1% are getting too much benefits of the growth, and bottom 90%, 99% are getting very meager. That's too extreme, 1% and 99%. But the basic idea is that the rich are getting much higher benefits than the poor. So in that case, we say that growth is not inclusive. Now, so what we are doing is that since there is a one-to-one linkage between equality and social welfare, how we measure equality depending on the social welfare function we choose. So in case of inclusive growth, social welfare function, everybody gets the positive weight. In pro-poor growth, only the poor gets all the weight. But in case of inclusive growth, only the inclusive growth, everybody gets some positive weight. But so from there we derive the idea of inequality, the equity. So we measure equity in income space using a class of social welfare function. Since inclusive growth is broad-based, yielding benefits to everyone, not just the poor, hence social welfare must assign positive weights to everyone in income. And so everyone participate in growth process and benefit from it. Now, supposing there's a discrimination, based on gender, religion, or ethnicity, may exclude some people from the growth process. So we don't call that growth as inclusive, because if there's a discrimination against some social groups, that you are excluding them, we don't call it inclusive growth. So inclusive growth depends on how different social groups are benefiting from economic growth. So we can empirically measure the change in inclusiveness by growth between social groups inequality. If there is too much inequality, some social groups are benefiting too much and others are benefiting too little, which means that growth is not inclusive. So it's a challenging task to how to relate social groups with inclusive growth. Social groups can be different kinds, like, social groups by gender, social groups by age, because when you have the policies, you target elderly for pension and all that. So we can have a social group by age, but in India, there are social groups like, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, that untouchables, right? How they are treated. So the discrimination goes against the inclusive growth. And so we should measure, because in policies, when we are making policies, it's easier to target social groups, that you can target, social groups and have policies so that some particular social groups who are very deprived, they benefit from it. So here, I'm trying to link the two, that how the different social groups are impacting pro-poor growth, are impacting inclusive growth. So the social groups are very important for policy making. I mean, the Philippines also, you may have many social groups, regional, rural, and urban, and so on. Social groups. So we formulate the policies to target the social groups, but in this paper, we are trying to relate the two, that how different social groups impact pro-poor growth, how they impact inclusive growth. Okay. So similarly, we can have a this is again technical, that inclusive growth, I've defined a social welfare function. Now, these are the different weights which we give to achieve inclusive development, inclusive growth. Now, then, so let me escape this technical part. So we can have a relative inclusive growth, absolute inclusive growth. So now then we talk about inclusive development, the same thing, the similar idea. The pro-poor growth, we extend it to development, we extend it to what life people can lead. So inclusive growth also, we can generalize the social welfare function, inclusive welfare for social welfare function to inclusive well-being function, inclusive well-being function. So that's the way derive, whether growth is inclusive development, there's inclusive development or non-inclusive development. So these are the different rules which, discussed in details in the paper, how to determine whether development is inclusive or whether development is non-inclusive. Okay. And similarly, absolute inclusive development, we can have relative inclusive development, so there are different ideas. Now I want to give you some illustration of the India, whether growth has been inclusive or not inclusive, whether growth is pro-poor or not pro-poor. So these four: pro-poor growth, pro-poor development, inclusive growth, and inclusive development. So we have applied this for the 2 decades in India. So as I pointed out, the pro-poor growth and inclusive growth is measured in income space, whereas pro-poor and inclusive development are measured in well-being space. The well-being is measured in terms of sense, formulation of functioning and capabilities. It is a multidimensional concept reflecting many aspects of life. But we haven't tried to make a one indicator of that, We are dealing separately, that each well-being indicator we are measuring separately, dealing it separately, because combining them, there are problems, many conceptual problems, which I don't want to indulge into that, So what I have done is to measure inclusive development or pro-poor development, I've used infant mortality rate, infant survival rate, life expectancy at birth, adult literacy rate, percentage of children under 5 years of stunting, percentage of children under 5 years of wasting, and percentage of children do not have sufficient weight for age. So these are the 6 indicators we have adopted to measure whether development in India has been pro-poor or inclusive. So what we have done, because we haven't, in India, we could not get the survey which gives you all the information. So we did the analysis at the state level. different states, whether poor state or rich state, how much development is taking place in poor states and rich states. So income is measured as a proxy is the net state domestic product. Okay. So this is the picture comes out that real per capita growth rate in India was for about 2 decades was 6.14%, which is pretty good growth. That India has achieved pretty good growth over 2 decades, 6.14% annually. And then also we have calculated the absolute growth rate. Absolute growth rate means that it has gained at the yearly rupees 3,463. The absolute means that, that in terms of, for instance, in Philippines, you have about 6% growth in Philippines, but you can also measure in absolute terms how many pesos, every year real income is increasing in pesos, So that's the idea of absolute growth rate, that you can measure in the local income currency of the income. And then we have infant survival rate. In India, points all are positive. Life expectancy growth rate is 0.57 per annum, over 20 years, and similarly, literacy rate 3.0. The literacy rate India has grown faster than in case of infant survival rate. And share of children stunting 1.54%. And so these are the broad picture, the average picture. But important is whether this picture gives you whether growth is pro-poor, inclusive, whether development is pro-poor or inclusive. Okay. So this can be applied in Philippines. This same thing can be applied to Philippines. And so this is the picture which comes out, that we want to know whether India's growth has been pro-poor or anti-poor. So here you can see that here, left-hand side in this figure, there's a loss of growth, that you can see here, that depending on what welfare function is used. There are two kinds of welfare functions we have used. One is that poor and very poor, extremely poor. So here, and then we have an absolute pro-poor growth. So you can see that there's a loss always, in this case, relative poor growth, the losing at annual rate of 1.51%, which means that India's growth rate hasn't been pro-poor. Similarly, absolute pro-poor, India's growth rate hasn't been, it has been declining at the rupees 564. 564. You can think about in the pesos too, that real pesos, that say 2011 pesos, so 2000, so real pesos, you can see that how much is the, absolute pro-poor growth in terms of the pesos. So the conclusion emerging from here is that India's growth rate hasn't been pro-poor. Right? Now here, inclusive again, we are having a loss. The relative inclusive growth is reducing at 0.95%, whereas absolute inclusive growth is reducing at 1,652 rupees per annum, real terms. So what is the conclusion we are getting is that India's growth rate has been neither pro-poor, not inclusive, both relatively and absolutely. This is a very strong, result which is coming out from India. And India has, has achieved very high economic growth, 6% for 20 years, right? But the benefits of growth haven't been shared, There's a prosperity in India, but not the shared prosperity. Okay? So, this work can be done for Philippines very easily. And now I look at the development, India's relative growth development. So here we can see that the literacy rate, children stunted, children underweight, children wasted, infant survival rate, and life expectancy at birth. So you can see here that there's a gain in, the development that, that poor are also gaining, the percentage of life literacy rate has gone up very high, quite high, and percentage of children underweight, but life expectancy has declined, little bit. So which means that what we have identified here is that growth, pro-poor development, life expectancy at birth is development in that indicator is not pro-poor, in life expectancy, but other indicators, they have done better. And poor have done relatively better. Now, similarly here, we have, this is the absolute, that was a relative pro-poor, but same thing conclusion comes out. But here, same thing comes out that absolutely the development has been pro-poor, except the life expectancy in terms of the relative thing. Now, so when I presented this seminar at, Hyderabad, they were very surprised about it, that how can growth be anti-poor, inclusive, is not inclusive, but development is, pro-poor. So answer is very simple. That, I wrote a paper about many years ago, that these indicators of development, like life expectancy at birth, infant survival rate, and all that, I found out that if you are at a low level of development, right, then it's easier to improve. But if you are at a high level of development, it becomes more difficult. For instance, life expectancy at birth, say if you want to increase from 60 to 65, it's much easier than if you increase 80 to 85. Or if you increase 90 to 95, impossible, So the idea, that's why, we are getting development to be, pro-poor or inclusive, but not, in terms of income, they are not. That is one explanation. But moreover, the development indicators, they have upper limit, they cannot go on, increasing where income can, income can increase very, very rapidly and substantially, So income can be pro-poor, may not be pro-poor, may not be inclusive, but development can be. But I don't know, this is just a state level analysis, right? But we can extend it. We should do, actually, the real thing we should do is use the household survey, exact household survey, as they are available in Philippines. And then you can find out whether it has been, development has been inclusive, pro-poor, right? So this is the illustration from India, but I think they were very surprised when I was trying to explain, because they have upper limit, so development is different from, from income, when you are income space is different from well-being space. Again.
Press N. Importantly, press N. Yes.
Okay. So, the concluding, it was surprising for them that I don't know whether they bought my idea or not, but development. But we haven't, the recent literature on, multidimensional poverty, which Celia is working on that, what they do is they combine different components of well-being, right, to get a composite index of well-being. But here you are not doing that, But if you want to do it, you can do it. But don't have to, I see that, for instance, we have identified that 4 or 5 indicators: development of pro-poor and anti-poor, or pro-poor and inclusive, but life expectancy is not, So we have identified one variable, which is, because, income can have impact, but life expectancy is a long-term, indicator. It's not a short-term, where the infant mortality rate and all these are more short-term indicators. So there's a distinction between the two, So we have to be careful about that. We have to. So the main conclusion is that you can measure. All these 4 concepts are different. They are not the same, right? And we can measure it. We can, once we know what we are measuring, right, then we can evaluate the policy, whether we are achieving pro-poor growth or inclusive development by, evaluating different policies, and which in Philippines, you can easily do it. Somebody has to work on that. But I'm also thinking of doing the global picture. Here I've done the state level in India, but globally, we can cover 150, 160 countries, and each country we can get the information on all these variables, and do the whole analysis for globally. Whether globally it has been inclusive, it has been pro-poor, whether development has been inclusive of, pro-poor, and so on. And also the social, social groups, they are very important from policy point of view. That how to, why particular growth? How much is the contribution of a particular social group to the total pro-poor growth? Then you can decide whether to target that particular group for the policy. So there's a lot of things can be done here. And we can also relate, that income finds the income, you can have a different kinds of income. Wage income, profit income, and so on. So we can see how much is the contribution of this to inclusive growth, to pro-poor growth, and so on. So a lot of things can be done within this framework. This framework, I think, is very general. It can be applied any country, and we can analyze different policy issues. Okay. So I think I stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kakwani, for that very interesting and highly informative presentation. So friends, we now open the floor for questions. But before that, we have on Zoom your co-author, Dr. Zakaria Siddiqui. Yes, and I'd like to invite Dr. Siddiqui to, if he has anything to add to the presentation, sir, if you are listening. Yeah, he's already, we already put him as a panelist on Zoom. So feel free to intervene, sir. Okay, so any questions from our on-site participants? Yes, Roel, please use the microphone. And please introduce yourself.
Yeah,
Good afternoon, Ruel Briones, PIDS Fellow. So thank you, Professor Kakwani. That was a very innovative way of looking at these, very familiar issues, but you found a fresh way of looking at it. I have two questions. One is technical. Second is policy related. For the technical one, I couldn't quite follow. Maybe I missed something in the conceptual framework, but you seem to be measuring the well-being indicator with some continuous variable. But when you did the actual analysis, you had child is stunted or not. So it seems that there's something binary or dichotomous going on at the household level. So it was not clear to me how you mapped out your well-being indicator that seemed to be a continuous function of income, right? Based on the conceptual framework, and how it mapped out to the actual empirical application. So I think it's just a simple explanation. The second one is policy-wise. Let's say, okay, we found this particular case in India. It's not so pro-poor, not so inclusive. Suppose we found in another country, it is pro-poor, that the nature of growth is pro-poor and inclusive. Any indications of what is the appropriate policy? Should we, for example, intensify social protection and redistributive policies in India and maybe lay off a little bit and focus on accelerating growth in that other location or country?
Yeah, very interesting. The first question, when we say well-being indicator, if you have a household survey, suppose, you have, then household survey provides you incomes of the people, households, per capita individuals, right? But also survey also provide you how much is the employment of that particular household, total employment, how many people are employed, how much is, this well-being indicators of a particular, whether there had been in particular household, how many deaths have taken place, or how many, how much is the longevity of that household, or employment. So you can, calculate. So it's, simple count. Okay. And second question, I don't know. Different countries have, first of all, my idea is that, for example, in India, what they did in India, they gave a lot of policies, to cocktail of policies. They say, okay, these policies will lead to inclusive growth, right? Policies don't lead to inclusive. We don't know. Some policies may lead to inclusive growth, others may not. So we really don't know. The policy cannot tell you whether growth is inclusive or not, because there are several policies, they have a different, impact, right? But what I'm saying is that once we define and measure whether growth has been inclusive or not, right, then we can evaluate the policy. How can we evaluate? For instance, I talked about social groups, supposing if I know that this particular social group, say elderly, right? Elderly people, they contribute a lot to NTP. Okay, their development, elderly have, lower well-being, so on. So once you identify the groups, right, then you can target them to improve your, proper growth and all that. So you can connect, this is the evidence-based policy, we are not just talking about, in air, we are not just talking about this, we are just connecting them, so that is important here. But in the Indian situation, what they do is they give the top cocktail of many, many policies and hoping that they will achieve inclusive growth, or they will achieve pro-growth.
Thank you, Professor. And I think your response is related to this question from Arun Kumar. He said, very insightful presentation. The methodology is useful for assessing existing policies, but thus this methodology also help in designing policies that would lead to pro-poor and inclusive growth. Yes.
Yeah, you can, I mean, I also gave an example. I also gave an example of, different kinds of, wage income and non-wage income and income from dividends, income from rents and all that. Yeah? So you can put into the social welfare and then find out whether how much they contribute to pro-poor growth or, inclusive growth and so on, So you can connect, it's evidence-based, I mean, all policies. So in a different countries, if you have all the data, you can do it. And fortunately, Philippines has the data. so you can, formulate these policies.
Thank you, Professor. Other questions from our on-site participants? Okay, Dr. Orbeta, please. Thank you, sir.
I'd just like to clarify about, is there a role for preferences in, you mentioned about functioning as a choice. When you use the indicators, of course, maybe it's because of data, it's some kind of externally chosen indicators. Like, for example, some people would like to spend their money on Gucci rather than let's say or they derive utility from that, but some others not. So is there a role for the preference of the person in all of these measurements?
Role of the individual person. I mean, individuals, when they get income, they have a choice where to spend the money, right? They can spend on Gucci. I see here in the Philippines, I'm staying in Discovery opposite Podium, So when I go to the Podium, I find that all the restaurants and cafes, they are full of people, and they are very expensive. I mean, as expensive as what I find in Australia, right? But people are spending and, like anything, But if you come out of that Podium, if you go to real Manila, you'll find that people are struggling. People are struggling because they don't have enough income means, So we are not going into how people will spend, I mean, they spend because if they have the income or they have the, our concern is the benefits. Who are getting how much benefits, I mean, here I find that maybe that over time here, the Philippines, it has become expensive, the cafes and restaurants are becoming very expensive, right? So how they, benefit, I mean, there must be some people are benefiting a lot and other people are benefiting very meager, right? Very small benefits, who are struggling to meet their both ends meet, And same thing is happening in developed country too, in Australia too. The same thing is happening at the moment, Rents have gone up, energy prices have gone up in Australia, and people are really struggling. Some people are really struggling to meet, pay their bills and, get, heating in their house, when it is very cold, So I'm more concerned with the benefits, benefits of growth, whether poor or non-poor or inclusive and so on.
Because we shut down the waste of the rate.
Yeah,
But with inclusive.
Inclusive, I give this positive weight, but weight decreases. As income increases, the weight is decreasing. Okay, so which means that the poor are getting, which means that inequality, equity, we are looking at the equity, that when weight is decreasing, that's what diagram, I was showing, that in case of inclusiveness, everybody benefits, the positive weights. In poor, pro-poor, we are only focusing on the poor, but here everybody, but some are benefiting more than the other. So we have to capture that. We capture through equity, okay, how benefits are equitably distributed or not.
And the weights are determined empirically or?
Oh, weights, we are determining weights by ranking by income. You rank the individuals by income. I mean, this is the idea of Amartya Sen, that ranking, because lower you are in the ranking, more deprivation you are suffering, right? So if you have if you are suffering from high deprivation, so we give higher weight, higher ranking, So we are determining ranking by ranking only, nothing else, So it's straightforward ranking, There's no other formula, straightforward ranking. If you have a household survey, you have their income, you can rank and then calculate probability distribution function, right? So the interesting question, I mean, what you are raising is interesting question, but it's very simple. It's not very ad hoc, The idea is that you are lower, you are in ranking, more deprived you are. So more deprived you are, the more weight you get, to capture equity, Okay.
Dr. Siddiqui is already on our Zoom screen. So, Dr. Siddiqui, would you have anything to add? Yes, go ahead, sir. Okay.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi.
There he is.
Yeah. Sorry, I was having problem in switching on the mute thing. Nothing to add. There was one question earlier about how to do it at micro level, particularly the stunting and wasting. So actually, stunting comes from the height data, which is a continuous data. Then we reduce it into some sort of WHO standards. So we can actually take the continuous height data and then give the weightage based on what Professor Kakwani was just now explaining. So growth of weight for the poorest in the population will be getting more weightage. So that's how we can do. Another way is that group the data, micro data at income level, and then see the prevalence, and then calculate the welfare function. So yeah, it can be done at micro level as well.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. Okay, let's entertain more questions from Zoom. We have one from Marjorie Garcia. What could be the determinants or indicators of pro-poor growth? What do you think could be pro-poor policies that could benefit the poor, given that the Philippines has an increasing GNP/GDP, but still there is a large portion of the Filipinos who are poor? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to the old, my previous, that whether we should pay attention to growth, most attention to the growth or the distribution. There's a division among economists, that some think that growth is important and other things, the distribution is important. So what I'm saying is that you have to have a combination of the two, that
growth and distribution.
Combination of the two, growth and distribution. About the policies, I mean, I'm reluctant to prescribe any general policy, without any empirical evidence, So here you can connect what are the causes why growth is pro-poor, how much, different social groups are contributing to pro-poorness. Maybe you can have a groups poor and non-poor, and then you bring that, the poor and non-poor. So So it's all evidence-based, that I cannot tell, one general policy and fits all, it doesn't, we have to look at the empirical, but connecting the two is very, this paper provides the methodology to link the two things, So, even social programs, for instance, you have a social program, here you have, yeah, you have a lot of social programs. Now, social programs, how effective they are, I mean, it's not just having a social program, okay, I mean, you have to measure the effectiveness of social program, because I was evaluating Chinese, debound social program, where they give cash transfers to individuals. Now, I've evaluated and published a paper in China. So I found that their program was very inefficient. They were spending a lot of resources in the program. And I'll give you an example. That they spent 87 billion yuan on the program per year in that particular year. And then I asked it, how much is the beneficiary, how much they are getting? 20 billion. Where is 60 billion is disappearing? Where is it going? Administrative cost, So what I was getting, I acquired an idea of social rate of return, that when you make an investment, I see Philippines, a lot of infrastructure investment is going on. So when you make an investment in infrastructure, you also calculate how much is the rate of return from that infrastructure, right? I mean, yeah. When government spends the money on infrastructure, they want to have rate of return. Now, any business, when they make investment, they look at the rate of return. So I'm saying that if you are spending money on social programs, you also look at the social rate of return. Yeah? I mean, in China, so much expenditure and then the impact is very small. So my social rate of return, which I get in China, is negative. I mean, you cannot have a program which is the negative social rate of return, it should be considerably larger than, at least 5 or 7, 8, 10%, rate of return should be there, but it is not, in China, it was negative, Okay.
Professor, okay. Before I entertain more questions from Zoom, other questions from our on-site participants, please use the microphone.
Yeah.
Nice to see you again, Dr. Kakwani.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I came here just to see you. But I'm Novel, actually. I'm sure Novel from the House of Representatives. My question, actually, I don't know if I'll be making sense with my question, but I do appreciate the idea of a pro-poor measurement. And I cannot help think because, again, in Congress, we will be, again, doing the process of budget allocation. And I would like, and we were discussing earlier, this would really be very an important input on whether or not the way we allocate our resources contribute to pro-poor outcomes. And it would be nice to see if you were mentioning China earlier, and they were spending so much, but in terms of outcome, the rate of return is only so much. And we would appreciate if you can share any, I don't know, how we may be able to operationalize this and be able to link this in how we allocate the budget, because it would be really, in fact, one application that I'm on the top of my mind is because we are now transferring so much subsidy to the local government because of the Supreme Court ruling that the allocation for the subnational unit will be increased. But the way we distribute that by local government levels to the provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays still requires more nuanced distribution formula, and I think it would be very helpful if we are able to incorporate this in the distribution formula. But again, how do we start doing this? The first step would be most helpful to the policymakers.
I think, I mean, that's a very important question. I mean, policy question. Very important, that budget, you know, when you are formulating the budget. I mean, in the Congress also, there's a lot of discussion about, you know, what will be the impact of so much expenditure on so much infrastructure, local governments and all that, you know, there's a lot of debates about it, right? So my point of this is that debate is very good, you know, everybody should contribute to that debate, but at the same time also, they should look at the data. Look at, you know, that whether that particular expenditure on the local governments, you know, I mean, local governments are part of the data, you know, I mean, you can get the information about the local government, how rich they are and how poor they are, and whether, you know, so you can evaluate, you know, again, coming back to social rate of return, you have to calculate the social rate of return, which means that you have to have some social welfare function, you know. So idea of this seminar is that how you can use the social welfare function, right, to get the social rate of return, you know. I mean, that is important. I mean, every business, you know, how do they business people, they invest money, you know, they invest, you know, in certain projects, some things that don't they calculate how much is the return, you know, of their investment. So I think government should do the same thing, you know, not just, you know, some governments, you know, they can allocate money political basis, you know, okay, we have to please these particular politicians of that region, so you give money to them, you know. So that I object to that. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Kakwani, and thank you to Executive Director Novel of CPDRU for your question. We have a request for clarification here, a professor from Maria Victoria Evangelista, regarding what you mentioned earlier, that you do not agree with the statement that if growth reduces poverty, then it is pro-poor.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you expound on that? That is her request.
Yeah, that's an important question. Actually, it was Ravalian and Chen, you know, they suggested that if there's a reduction in poverty, it is pro-poor, otherwise not. First of all, poverty can be measured in different ways, you know. Many poverty measures have been proposed in the literature. So some poverty measures may show pro-poor, other poverty measures may show anti-poor. So then we are confused about that, you know. So that's what I'm focusing on, the benefits going, you know. Benefits are fixed, you know. I mean, but poverty line, you know, depends on, you know, what poverty measure you use. That is one thing. Another thing I found, you know, empirical analysis I did, that the countries which had positive growth rate, positive economic growth rate, in 90%, 95% cases, there was a reduction in poverty. You know, you just have, you know, reduction in poverty when growth is positive, right? So which means that most of the growth process, most of the growth will be pro-poor, you know, because 95%, you know, you find that growth is, you know, reducing the poverty. Secondly, oppositely, supposing growth is negative, and if it is still reducing the poverty, which is very unlikely, which I didn't find that it was, you know, no country, very few countries you can have, you know, that growth is negative and poverty is reducing, you know, right? That's a very strong requirement. So hardly anybody. So that also makes it very confusing, you know. So that's why I said I don't agree with the third outcome. But first two, you know, that relative pro-poor growth, proportionally when I say, and absolute is a stronger requirement. Okay? So it depends on what you want. You want a stronger requirement, huh? Because absolute is a stronger requirement. Supposing I say, my income, supposing my income is increasing by 5%. Huh? Okay, but I say that my income is increasing by 2,000 pesos. So there's a difference between the two, Okay, absolute and actually absolute is more intuitive. People can understand, that how much is the increase in income, but not the percentage. So absolute is important to me, but most of the economists, they deal with inequality when they are talking about, they talk about relative inequality, that inequality is with 0.5 or 0.3 and so on, right? But I look at more in terms of, when there's a growth, then income is increasing, so inequality is also increasing, because some people are getting much higher incomes than other people.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Professor. We have another question here from Jose Marie Trinidad, and it has been answered by Dr. Siddiqui, but let me read the question, since our participants here on here at PIDS cannot see the question as well as the answer of Dr. Siddiqui. And Dr. Siddiqui, may I request you to answer it live? The question of Jose Maria Trinidad is inclusive growth culturally motivated, especially in the Philippines, where there is a great divide between the rich and the poor, and how we perceive poverty? Dr. Siddiqui, please. Okay, there's a problem with your audio. Perhaps
No. Sorry, I wanted to reply to the question where there was this any reduction in poverty should be qualified as pro-poor. I don't know if I typed it wrongly to the message, but my answer was that if you look at India's case of the 2 decades of the study period that we have considered, almost all period, a growth episode would be qualified as pro-poor, because it actually reduced poverty for all the periods. But the problem is that when you look at the overall gain for the poor in terms of their income growth versus the rest of the population, then poor have actually not gained that much compared to the rest of the population. So that is what Professor Kakwani was saying.
Okay.
So I may have typed it on a wrong, yeah.
Okay.
Does it answer the question?
No, actually, that was his answer to the other question about where the participants sought clarification. But would you like to answer the question that I earlier read, sir?
Can you read it again?
Okay, let me. Where is that? I couldn't see it anymore. Okay, it's inclusive growth, culturally motivated, especially in the Philippines, where there is a great divide between the rich and the poor, and how we perceive poverty. What do you think?
I mean, Philippines is not the unique country in that, I mean, there is a inequality, and I see that, first of all, with the pandemic and all that, looks like that inequality might have increased here. That's my guess, when I haven't looked at the recent data. But if you look at it, I think my hunch is that, observing here, that inequality might have been increasing in Philippines. And also poverty might be, I don't know, poverty, because growth is 6%. So maybe that reduction depends on how much is the reduction in poverty with the 6% growth. You can calculate 1% growth, how much is the poverty reduction, normalize it. So, I don't know. I mean, that's an empirical question. We have to look at it.
Okay. So we have this will be our last question unless there are someone from PIDS, someone from our on-site participants has another question. Anyone? Okay, please Ruel, and then we will go to this final question from Zoom.
I took the chance. This is my second question. But can I play the devil's advocate a little bit, Professor Kakwani? Because you mentioned that there are various measures of poverty. So in fact, the simple poverty headcount ratio is actually weird. The weighting scheme there is actually assigning a weight to the least poor. The nearer you are to the poverty line, it's easier to alleviate your poverty, and that will be the most efficient way to drive down your poverty. But if you give the money to the lowest part of the distribution, actually it doesn't reduce your incidence. That said, maybe other inequality-averse measures might suffice, because if I'm challenged to understand this new framework, can I already infer the pro-poorness of economic growth simply by checking trends in, say, squared poverty gap or other inequality-averse poverty measures?
Yeah, actually, I mean, a lot of discussion I have given in my book, recent book. Can you show them the book?
Here's the book.
Here is the book, which came out just recently. It has discussed many issues about measuring poverty and all that. Actually, before 2008, I introduced the idea of poverty equivalent growth rate, which you can calculate for any poverty measure. You can select any poverty measure and calculate poverty equivalent growth rate, right? But here what I'm changing is that social welfare function, which gives all the weight to the poor, right? And from there, I'm inferring whether growth is pro-poor or anti-poor, So we don't have to go into poverty measurement, because poverty measures there are many now, numerous poverty measures, there's the chapter, some are good, some are bad and all that, So when you are talking about growth, we should be talking about the benefits, who's benefiting, how much, Then all the welfare programs and all that, they are related to the benefits, who's getting what. So whether you are using square poverty line, FGT measure and so on, it doesn't matter really, because this welfare analysis, which I'm presenting in this new paper, is new, the way how to capture, without going into choosing a poverty measure, But you have to choose the welfare function, whether inequality aversion, I've got two, V1, V2, V0, So only you have to do that, and you have to just do that rather than going into detailed poverty measure, So this is much simpler, because in poverty equivalent growth rate, I was getting a lot of attention on that paper, where I had to introduce the idea of poverty elasticity of growth, that when mean income increases by 1%, how much will be the reduction in poverty? When inequality does not change, inequality has to be constant, does not change, right? So in that elasticity, I use a decomposition analysis to estimate that elasticity. But I found that many researchers could not calculate, they were asking me how to calculate, they wanted to do file, and all that, But it is very simple, it's explained very simple way, but still people were finding it difficult. But the analysis which I'm presenting today, is much simpler. You don't have to calculate that elasticity. Okay.
Thank you for that. So this is your new book, sir?
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us something about it while I check the questions.
Oh, I don't know what to say about this. A long, big book, I spent many years on that writing this book. This book is, gives you all the discussion of inequality and poverty and all that. But it goes beyond that. It goes into relationship between, different indicators, If one indicator you change, how much is the effect of the other indicator? So that led me to many applications, I have also talked about, employment and productivity and, and many other applications in this book. This book is full of applications. And also DBOW chapter is in this book, that evaluating DBOW program. And then there are a lot of reduction in inequality by taxation, So there are four chapters on taxation, So this has a lot of information, which, you can apply them and, have many projects here in PIDS. I don't know whether you will be able to do that. You will do it,
So
okay?
to get a copy of this book.
Yeah.
So, okay. So Professor, we
And-
have,
and
please,
this-
okay.
And this one.
This was the Journal of Income Distribution, a special issue written in your honor, right? Published in your honor.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this I'm leaving here. Yeah. Not the book.
We will buy the book. Okay. Okay, Professor, we have some more questions from Zoom. Is it okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is about the role of rights or human rights. What is the role of respect for human rights and labor rights in ensuring proper growth and or inclusive growth?
The role of human rights.
Human rights. Well, it's very obvious.
Yeah, I mean, very, very general, but let me, it's a challenging to answer the question. I mean, first of all, when you are discriminated, for instance, in India, you have a scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, untouchable. And there's a discrimination, if there's a discrimination. I think that is human rights violation, when you are discriminated. Gender discrimination in the labor market, that's a human rights violation. And which can impact the proper growth, labor market discrimination, social groups, regional, rural, and urban, I mean, in China, they have a system, they discriminate against the rural area. That rural areas, they have to register, they have some program, that rural people cannot just go and register in urban areas because they will lose all the benefits and all that. But that's a kind of a human rights violation, And another thing, I want to also say that here I'm talking about four things, proper growth, inclusive growth, proper development, and inclusive growth. Let me add the fifth one, pro-environment.
Oh, yeah.
Because environment, the deterioration in environment impacts the people's well-being, right? And development, that's development, impact the well-being, So we should add one more. Not only 4, but 5.
Okay, yes.
I think environment is very important because now, now we see that a lot of warming taking place, there's many countries are facing very hot weather at the moment. Even China and Beijing, continuous hot weather, is coming up. So pro-environmental growth. Pro-environment. I mean, you can have a growth. You can have carbon emission and all that. Have a high economic growth, but at the same time, you are spoiling the whole environment. Right. So that comes the distribution in the environment. Everybody is suffering,
Okay, Professor, this will be our last question. Is there, well, from Oli Lucas, one of our Zoom participants, is there a set of welfare indicators that should be used by all? Or is the choice of indicators dependent on the country context? If it is the latter, how should the choice be made?
Now, that's a very difficult, very interesting question. Actually, there was a big debate in Sen and what is the name, about that, that how to choose the indicators, how to, what are the relevant, I mean, very difficult because well-being indicators can be many, numerous, I mean, Celia knows better about this. There can be numerous indicators. You cannot use all of them because data may not be available, lot of problems, But we choose the basic one, some, focus on very few, which you think are essential. For instance, in this paper, we have used 6 indicators. I think life expectancy at birth is a basic thing. Infant mortality rate is another basic thing. And stunting children, children, nutrition, education. So few, you choose. I mean, and depending on particular country, that you see, you look at each individual indicator, and country is doing very badly in some, in some indicator. But as a life expectancy at birth here, I found that it was not so poor. So focus why it is happening, then you go into, policies. So that is why I don't want to have a composite index, but individually you can make the policy.
Thank you, Professor. What an engaging and informative discussion we just had. Please, let's give Professor Kakwani a well-deserved round of applause. And to cap this afternoon's conversation, it is but fitting that we thank him for sharing his time and expertise with us.
I enjoyed the discussion.
Please do come back. You're always welcome here at PIDS. And the PIDS would like to give him a certificate of appreciation and some publications produced by the Institute. And at this point, I would like to call on our president, our vice president, Dr. Marife Ballesteros, and our former president, Dr. Celia Reyes, here in front for the awarding of the certificate of appreciation, and to give Dr. Kakwani our token. Please, Professor, please go in front and let me read the message on the certificate. This is awarded to Dr. Nanak Kakwani for his invaluable contribution as speaker at the Creating Shared Prosperity, Operationalizing Pro-Poor and Inclusive Growth Goals with real-world data conducted by PIDS at the PIDS Conference Hall and via Zoom, given on the 6th day of July 2023 in Quezon City, Philippines, signed Aniceto Orbeta Jr.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we leave, I'd like to announce the winners of our raffle. For those who are joining us for the first time, Dr. Kakwani, every time that we have a webinar, we have a raffle to thank our participants. Okay, so from Zoom, we have architect Giovanni La Rosa. From on-site, one of our on-site participants, Jason Patrick Carreras. You're still here, Jason? Oh, thank you, Jason. And Joseph Ocdin of PIDS. Okay. So our webinar team will contact you for your prize, okay? There's really a prize, I tell you. I assure you there's a prize. Okay, and finally, we have some reminders. We have some reminders so you can access all the presentation of Dr. Nanak Kakwani on the PIDS website. And also, please answer the feedback survey that will pop on your screen after the event. Your comments are important to us to improve our seminars. Please also regularly visit our website and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel where you can access the recordings of our events. So what we had today is just the first of our 4 webinars this month. So we have 3 more. And these are on July 13, next week, we have our webinar on propelling devolution, assessing local government units, capacity and challenges. Act now or pay later, enhancing disaster risk governance for a resilient Philippines. And on July 27, we have a webinar with IPA, Innovations for Poverty Action and Transforming Education in the Philippines, Insights and Innovations. And finally, we would like to acknowledge all the various organizations from the government, civil society, private sector, business, and international development community that join us today, including our friends from the media. And so this concludes our hybrid seminar. Again, our sincere thanks to Professor Nanak Kakwani for visiting us. And yes, we will send you the link. Okay. And to all our attendees here at PIDS and on Zoom and Facebook for your presence and active participation. We hope you'll join us again next week. Maraming salamat.
PIDS, go to PIDS and I will get the link.
I will send you that.
Okay.
Yes.
You
You can watch the recording on our Facebook account and on YouTube. We will send you the link. Okay, so that concludes our seminar. Maraming salamat po. Enjoy the rest of your day. And for our on-site participants, please join us for a photo opportunity with Dr. Kakwani.